He came into the world when the empire was already beginning to lose its luster. On the outside, everything still looked grand. Palaces, armies, parties. But on the inside, cracks were appearing. It was like a beautiful wall with hidden mold. Antiochus was born around 215 BC, the son of Antiochus III, a king still called the Great, even though his greatness was already hanging by a thread. He was not born with the pomp of a hero or with a destiny mapped out for the crown. He was not the eldest, nor was he the chosen one. He was just another member of the royal family, an extra, at least in the beginning. He grew up among marble columns, watching generals pass by in their heavy robes and serious faces. He saw advisors whispering in corners, their voices low and fear ever present. It was not a time of peace. It was a time when alliances changed in the blink of an eye, and the Seleucid Empire, which once ruled vast lands in the east, was beginning to lose its momentum. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. The young Antiochus learned early on that survival did not come from his name, but from his cunning. His father's glory was slowly fading, while enemies emerged from the most unexpected corners. Rome was rising with force, and internal rebellions were eroding the foundations of power. Instead of following in his father's footsteps with honor and security, Antiochus saw the road ahead of him turn into a maze, full of dark alleys and invisible traps. Even so, he did not seem afraid. In the palace corridors, they said his eyes held a restless gleam, as if he saw things that others could not yet see. One day, when Rome demanded hostages as part of a humiliating agreement, guess who was sent? Yes, Antiochus himself. And so, carrying the shadow of the empire and the shame of exile, he left his homeland. No one imagined that the boy taken by force to an enemy land would one day return with a thirst for domination. And even more, with an almost insane desire to prove that he was born to reign. Rome was not his home, it was his golden prison. While Antiochus lived as a political hostage, surrounded by cold soldiers and statues of strange gods, he learned more than the Romans wanted him to know. He listened to stories of war, power, and strategy, with his ears wide open. He watched, memorized, every banquet where he was unwelcome, every dirty look from a senator, every order he had to obey. It all fed something inside him, a cold rage, a wounded pride, and a plan that only he knew was being hatched. Meanwhile, far away, his brother Seleucus IV occupied the throne that, perhaps by right or destiny, should have been his. But politics was never just about rights. It was about opportunity. And opportunity, as they say, loves to wear the guise of chaos. When Seleucus was assassinated by his own minister, the empire plunged into confusion. There was a legitimate heir, the young Demetrius, but he was also in Rome under surveillance. The throne was vulnerable, like a safe left wide open in an unguarded city, and that's when Antiochus made his move. With the help of clever allies and empty promises, he managed to leave Rome and reach Syria. He arrived smiling, but inside he was already taking possession. He pretended to be just a temporary protector, someone there to maintain order until his nephew took over. But once he gained the right trust and eliminated the right obstacles, the temporary became permanent. Antiochus was now king, not by vote, nor by popular acclaim, but because he knew how to play the game. He ascended the throne with the coldness of someone who knows there will be no second chance. And once the crown was on his head, he showed the world that he would not be just another king. He wanted to be seen as a living god, not metaphorically, not exaggeratedly, literally a god among men. He had coins minted with his face, flanked by lightning bolts and divine symbols, and stamped on them the title he had chosen for himself, Epiphanes. the manifestation of God. Yes, he believed it, or he wanted everyone to believe it. But not everyone bought into the idea. In the streets and markets, the people whispered another name, Epimanes, the madman, a nickname whispered in fear, but repeated often. The king, who wanted to be worshipped as divine, walked through the cities dressed as a commoner, appeared unexpectedly at popular festivals, and sometimes acted as if the throne were a theater stage. One day, he would distribute coins to the poor, pretending to be an ordinary citizen. The next, he would organize bizarre parades with himself at the center, dressed as Apollo or Dionysus. His advisors trembled, his generals looked at each other, but no one dared to say what they thought. Because behind the costumes and extravagant gestures, there was a sharp mind and a ruthless heart. Antiochus knew how to use fear as a tool, and he knew how to choose where to strike. It was at this moment that he turned his eyes to a small but resistant land, Judah, a rebellious territory full of religious rules and traditions that refused to bow to Greek culture. While other provinces adopted the customs of the empire, Jerusalem maintained its temple, its rituals, and a people who claimed to serve an invisible God. This bothered Antiochus. More than politics, it was personal. A king who saw himself as a god could not accept being ignored by a people who refused to even speak his name in prayer. So he decided to act. Jerusalem had always been stubborn. While the empire spread like ink across the map, that city insisted on being different. It did not accept statues of gods, did not eat like the Greeks, did not bow to other traditions. For Antiochus, this was a direct affront, as if that small people wanted to say, "You don't rule here." So he decided to show them who was boss. In the year 175 BC, Antiochus entered the scene in his typical style, fast, theatrical, and cruel. He began by placing his people in positions of power. He tried to force Greek culture down the Jews' throats, like someone pushing water through a clogged funnel. He ordered a gymnasium to be built in Jerusalem, very close to the temple, where young men would train naked, something unthinkable according to local customs. It was more than influence, it was provocation. But he wanted more, much more. During one of his military campaigns in Egypt while he was away, rumors circulated that he had died. The Jews, seeing this as an opportunity, rose up in revolt. And when he returned and discovered the rebellion, he showed no mercy. He invaded Jerusalem with troops, killed thousands, plundered the city, and invaded the temple. The holiest place of the Jews became a battlefield. But the worst was yet to come. In the heart of the temple, where the presence of the God of Israel had once rested, Antiochus erected a statue of Zeus. There, where the priests had once walked with fear, pagan sacrifices were now offered, including pigs, which were unclean to the Jews. It was as if he had spat on everything that people believed in. With each new order, he cut a piece of Judah's soul. He wanted to bend their faith until it snapped. He wanted to erase the identity of that people until no one remembered who they were. But in trying to extinguish the flame, he unwittingly added fuel to the fire, because a response was forming. Silent at first, but about to explode with all the force of despair. It was in the year 167 BC that oppression was given an official name, a decree. Antiochus signed an edict that directly and brutally prohibited everything that made the Jewish people Jewish. The scriptures were torn apart. The Torah scrolls were burned in public squares. Circumcision became a crime. The Sabbath was cancelled. And anyone caught practicing these traditions was punished with death. It was no longer just a religious attack. It was an attempt to erase the identity of an entire people. And as if that weren't enough, Antiochus ordered pagan altars to be set up in every city in Judea. At each one, residents were forced to offer sacrifices to Greek gods. The scene was always the same. Armed soldiers, people gathered by force, and pigs, the ultimate symbol of impurity for Jews, being slaughtered on stones. It was humiliation with the taste of blood. Many gave in, out of fear, for protection, out of desperation. Others fled to caves, hideouts, mountains, but deep in every wounded heart something began to beat stronger. It wasn't just rebellion, it was wounded dignity. It was the feeling that if they accepted it silently, they would lose even their right to exist. And one day, that feeling found a voice. In the small village of Mondim, south of Jerusalem, soldiers arrived demanding sacrifices. A man stepped forward to obey, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of convenience. But before he could complete the ritual, an old priest took the lead. With fiery eyes and steady hands, he killed the man and attacked the soldiers. His name was Mattathias, and in that moment, without speeches or promises, he lit the spark that was missing. After the coup, Mattathias looked at the people around him and shouted, "Whoever is for God, come with me." Mattathias fled to the mountains with his sons and a few followers. They had no armor, no war strategy. They had courage and faith, a lot of faith. They began to live as outlaws, deep in the desert, attacking in ambushes, sabotaging the empire's plans little by little, like ants undermining a wall. The days were hard. They slept in the open, with the wind whistling through the rocks. They ate little and spoke even less, but every blow against Antiochus's soldiers was like a prayer in the form of a sword. And even though they were outnumbered, they felt protected by something greater. But time was running out, and Mattathias, now old and worn out by a life on the run, knew that his end was near. He called his sons and handed the baton to one of them, Judas, his third son. Strong, determined, and respected, Judas did not hesitate. He took the leadership as one takes a hammer. And so he became known as Judas Maccabeus, the Hammer of God. Judas transformed that improvised resistance into a group of warriors. He had no army, but he had a strategy. He had no numbers, but he had vision. He knew every trail, every cave, every secret passage in Judea, and he used that as a weapon. He attacked when the enemy least expected it. He struck by surprise. He disappeared like the wind, and each victory encouraged the people more. Ordinary people began to join the cause. Men, young people, old people, all willing to fight for something greater than their own lives. Antiochus, from above, began to realize that this little mountain rebellion was not so small after all. He sent stronger troops, he reinforced the cities, he promised rewards. But nothing seemed to stop the Maccabees, and while the king's eyes were turned to other wars, Judas was already planning his next move, a daring, almost impossible plan. He wanted more than resistance. He wanted to take back the heart of Jerusalem. Judas Maccabeus was not a king, nor was he a trained general. But when he spoke, men listened to him as if they were listening to thunder. He had that presence that didn't need to shout to be heard. And more than strength in his arms, he carried purpose in his eyes. He knew what he wanted, and he was bold enough to try. While the empire sent troops and more troops to crush the revolt, Judas faced them with small groups, armed with whatever they had. Stones, spears, old swords repurposed. Victory did not come from numbers, but from will. He knew every move the enemy soldiers would make before they even arrived. In every ambush, his name echoed. The Seleucid soldiers began to fear walking at night. They had nightmares about the sudden sound of hooves and screams cutting through the darkness. It was as if the desert was alive and allied with the rebels. Judas won battles that no one believed could be won. The Battle of Emmaus, for example. A well-armed army led by trained generals fell before the Maccabees like straw in a fire. The news spread quickly, and with it, hope returned to the hearts of those who were tired of suffering. It was then that Judas looked again at Jerusalem. It wasn't just about reconquering a city. It was about restoring the dignity of a people. The temple was still there, but it had been desecrated, taken over by pagan images, dirty from strange rituals and smelling of burning pork. That hurt more than any physical wound. So Judas gathered his men. There weren't many of them, but they were determined. They climbed toward the city with faith in their feet and fury in their hands. The mission was clear. Retake the temple, purify it, make the name of God heard again within those ancient walls. And when they reached the gates, they knew there was no turning back. Either Jerusalem would be holy again, or they would die trying. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty streets of Jerusalem. Judas Maccabeus and his men marched as if treading on sacred ground and violated ground. The city was silent, but it was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after pain, after shame. The stones of the houses still held the smell of desecration. The temple, the heart of that people, seemed to breathe heavily, waiting for redemption. When the rebels reached the Temple Mount, they found the place filled with strange symbols. Altars dedicated to Zeus, remains of pagan sacrifices, dried blood on the stones. It was as if the sacred had been covered with a thick, bitter dust. Judas's men stopped for a moment in silence. No one said anything, but their eyes spoke. Then they began the cleansing. They broke the statues, tore down the altars, burned everything that reminded them of foreign gods. They washed every corner, scrubbed every wall, and they rebuilt the altar with new, pure stones, without any marks from the invasion. It was like giving the place a new lease on life, like making the temple breathe again. 3 years after its desecration, they lit the lamps of the sacred candelabra. There was only enough oil for a single day, but mysteriously, the light remained lit for 8 whole days. The time needed to prepare more pure oil. This miracle, passed down from generation to generation, gave rise to the festival of Hanukkah. As the songs rose to the sky, Antiochus received news of what had happened, and what should have been just another isolated rebellion now became a symbol of resistance. The news of the temple's recapture struck Antiochus like a bolt from the blue. He was not in Jerusalem. He was busy with other military campaigns, trying to keep his empire standing. But when he heard that the Jews had not only defeated the soldiers, but also purified the temple and rekindled the faith of the people, something inside him broke. It was as if his crown had been torn from his head with bare hands. The king, who saw himself as a divine incarnation, was now being challenged by a group of peasants and priests armed with courage and stones. The pain of his wounded ego turned into poison running through his veins. They say he had fits of rage, that he screamed incessantly in the palace corridors, breaking objects, cursing the sky, the earth, and all the gods, that he beat his chest and said that Jerusalem would be crushed, that the temple would be wiped off the map. But the promises remained unfulfilled because, as his anger grew, his body began to collapse. A mysterious illness took hold of Antiochus. Some said it was leprosy. Others spoke of worms coming out of his body. There was fever, delirium, screams in the middle of the night. He talked to himself, muttered meaningless words, and asked for help from gods he himself claimed to be. On his bed, surrounded by the few who had not yet fled, Antiochus felt the weight of the empire he could no longer control. The throne seemed distant. Glory was a faint echo. And he, who thought himself immortal, was now trapped in a frail, sick body, rotting before his time. His last attempt to reconquer Jerusalem remained only an intention, because before the sword left its sheath, his eyes could no longer see clearly. And amid the delirium, between moans and whispers, a word began to emerge in the corridors of the palace. A word that no one dared to say aloud, but everyone already knew. End. Antiochus's body was buried far from the Holy Land he had tried so hard to conquer. No crowd mourned his departure, no people lamented his absence. The manifest God died as an ordinary man, sick, defeated, forgotten by many, but his name, that continued to echo, not as glory, but as a warning, because where he went he left his mark. His reign became a symbol of everything that happens when pride goes to the head and tyranny tries to erase faith. Every decree he made, every sacrifice he forced, Every statue he erected by force, all of it was remembered with pain, but also with resistance. The story of the Maccabees gained strength after his death. It inspired other generations. It fueled the hope that even when all seems lost, there can still be redemption. And that small flame lit in the temple, which burned longer than expected, became a sign of something greater, that there is a light that no one can extinguish. The name Antiochus came to be mentioned with a bitter taste as a reminder, and even the following centuries, with different empires and other kings trying to control the people of Israel, failed to erase what was marked by his fall. He wanted to be remembered as a god, and he was, but not in the way he expected. He was remembered as a tyrant who tried to destroy what he did not understand, as someone who confused power with eternity. The story of Antiochus ends like so many other stories of men who think they are greater than they are. He began as a forgotten prince, grew up as a hostage in enemy lands, returned as a usurper, and declared himself a god, a cycle that began with ambition and ended in delirium. But what remains in the end is not the throne he took, nor the territories he lost. What remains is the echo of the choices he made. He tried to impose his will by force, erase beliefs with decrees, and silence faith with fear. And all this only rekindled what he wanted to erase. The great irony is that the more he oppressed the people of Judah, the stronger they became. The more he tried to destroy, the more he built something he would never understand: courage. Antiochus teaches us through his own downfall that power is not eternal, and that no one can stand when they rise up against something that comes from within people. He didn't just lose battles, he lost touch with reality. He forgot that leadership is more than just giving orders. It is understanding, listening, and respecting. With every step he took by force, he dug his own grave. And when he finally fell, he was not overthrown by larger armies, but by a small people full of faith, hidden among mountains and memories. This story continues to be told not because of what Antiochus achieved, but because of what he provoked. He became a mirror of everything that happens when someone lets pride speak louder than the truth. And if there is a clear lesson in his twisted path, perhaps it is this: kings pass, titles fall, but faith, when it is real, resists even the cruelest empires, because there are some things that no sword can silence. If you enjoyed the story of King Antiochus and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.